Okay, it's time to commit. 2024 is the year for prioritizing yourself. Begin your new smile journey with Byte, and you could start seeing results in just 2 to 3 weeks. Just order your at-home impression kit today for only $14.95 at Byte.com. Byte Clear Aligners are doctor-directed and delivered to your door. Treatment costs thousands less than braces. Plus, they offer financing options, accept eligible insurance, and you can pay with your HSA FSA. Get 80% off your impression kit when you use code WONDERY at Byte.com. That's BYTE.com. Start your confidence journey today with Byte.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
It's easy to get lost in the latest true crime podcast or your favorite binge-worthy show. But what about your own story? That's the most important story of all, and therapy helps you write it. BetterHelp Therapy is 100% online and designed to be convenient and flexible enough to squeeze in between the next episode on your list. Get started today at betterhelp.com/pause for 10% off your first month.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
And welcome back to Scarred for Life, the podcast where we open up old wounds by looking back at the films that scared us as kids. I'm Terry.
And I'm Mary Beth.
Each episode, our special guest will bring with him a movie that traumatized him as a child.
This week, our guest is Michael Varrati, a filmmaker, director, screenwriter, and producer of a number of horror and queer projects, including Unusual Attachment, The Office Is Mine, and A Halloween Trick. He is also a writer, director, guest judge for the Boulet Brothers' Dragula, and of course, the host of the queer horror podcast Dead for Filth. Welcome to the show!
Oh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Do you have enough projects on your plate?
I was just going to ask that.
You know, I could always add some more. No, it is sort of a joke because I tend to like to take on many, many different things. And that's just always how I've been. It's my mind is constantly worrying and I want to do this and do that. And if I can find a space and make a way to do it, I will. So, yeah, you know, probably one or two more by the end of the day. Let's see.
Man. So how did you get into horror, Michael? Is it something that you've always been a fan of, or?
Yeah, I mean, for pretty much most of my life, I've been into horror. My origin story is really kind of similar to a lot of people's in that in the beginning, I was kind of a scaredy cat. Like, it didn't take much to terrify me. And I, for a long time in my early years, didn't want to engage with anything unsettling at all. And my parents loved to tell stories about how we would just be watching TV, and if the music would change to anything slightly intense, I would, like, little kid me would run over and turn off the TV. Like, I don't even want to know what's happening. Click. And, you know, poor mom and dad are just trying to watch a show. And I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I'm policing all of the content in the house. Like, with no scary stuff ever. But, you know, I've interviewed a lot of different creators and talked to a lot of different people within the horror genre. And I find that this is true of a lot of folks, is that a lot of us did start off is sort of absolutely terrified. And I think that there's a part of it that eventually becomes sort of a conquering of your fears. And then that conquering becomes an obsession. My turning point was back in the days of the TV Guide, when you had to, that's how you found out what was on. I used to pore over that because I was always interested in movies and TV, and I wanted to know what was on. And there was a show that aired on Friday and Saturday nights called USA Up All Night. It was on the USA Network back when they were kind of like a renegade network like MTV, where they were showing all the weirdo stuff. Oh, yeah. And on Friday and Saturday nights, Up All Night would host exploitation and drive-in and sex comedies and horror movies. And they were hosted on Fridays by Rhonda Shear, who was this awesome kind of buxom video vixen. And then Saturday nights, it was Gilbert Gottfried, or, you know, flip or reverse that. They hosted opposite nights, one out of LA and one out of New York. And I had seen in the TV Guide a listing for an Up All Night double feature of a movie called Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, and its sequel, Return of the Killer Tomatoes. And that title just like blew my mind. I was like, I want to know what this is. I have to watch this. And I was like, Mom, you have to let me watch this. You have to let me watch this. And my mom, super cool and sort of with the foresight of like letting people kind of take their own journey, despite my previous inclinations of being terrified by everything, was like, okay, you can watch this, but I'm going to watch it with you. And that's, you know, going to be our weekend activity. And she made a big bowl of popcorn and fell asleep 15 minutes into the first film. And she definitely like slept through, you know, for the next several hours, but I was glued to the set. And so I watched Attack of the Killer Tomatoes the whole way through and Return of the Killer Tomatoes the whole way through. And then how it used to be is after Rhonda or Gilbert would go off the air, USA would just re-show those movies back to back till morning or until the infomercials kicked in, right? And I just sat there and watched both of those movies again and again. So I must have seen those movies 2 or 3 times that night. And by morning, it was sort of a rebirth. And I freely and always acknowledge when I tell this story that yes, those were horror comedies and not like darker fare like I would engage with later, like Friday the 13th or Evil Dead or whatever. But it was a fundamental change for me because I had never seen a movie like those. And I had this sudden awareness, like these are not the movies that they're playing at the theater when Mom, Dad, and I go to the movies. These are not the movies that are being advertised on the cover of TV Guide or that are playing at the multiplex or that my friends at school are talking about. And I then became very obsessed with the idea of this other kind of movie, the movie that existed outside of what everyone was talking about, something that felt a little forbidden, a little outsider, a little other. And of course, now looking back, that taps into sort of my own queerness, I suppose, as well as interest in queer cinema that came later. But by that next day, that next week, I wanted to know more. I wanted to watch more. I wanted to find out all about these movies that no one was talking about. And that became the obsession. And that followed me through life. And, you know, I was always a writer. I always wrote stories as a teenager, and it was something that I followed into when I went to college. I had originally gone to college for broadcast journalism, but switched over to English literature because I was interested in sort of the construct and the power of storytelling and the history of storytelling.
Hell yeah, me too.
But yeah, from that time, I started going to conventions. I started working with this underground horror magazine called Ultraviolent, which was really sort of my crash course in the world of underground horror outside of the research of my own that I did, because I found like-minded people who were interested in the Killer Tomatoes and the Hollywood Chainsaw Hookers and the Vice Academy kind of movies, and we sort of had this mission statement that, of course, we love Fangoria. Of course, we love Rue Morgue and Famous Monsters of Filmland, but they tended to always interview the mainstream directors. And it's like, if I wanted to find a resource where John Carpenter was interviewed, we could, and it was there, and it was readily accessible. But what if I wanted to read an interview with the director of House on the Edge of the Park, Ruggero Deodato? It was, by and large, for a long time, not something that you could find. Nowadays with the advent of boutique label Blu-rays and things, and finding all of these people and bringing them on for commentary tracks, they're a lot more accessible, but for a time they weren't. And so we wanted to do the interview with the filmmaker that you always wanted to read, but also make it the definitive interview just in case they were never interviewed again. And we did a lot of footwork to find some of these people. Most of them were European or like retired filmmakers who in the indie side of things in the US. And that was sort of a crash course in the power of underground filmmaking for me. And I always knew that I was never going to be satisfied writing about movies. I wanted to write movies, but I kind of took that time sitting with people like Dario Argento or Mayor Zarki or John DeBello, who created Attack of the Killer Tomatoes, who I insisted upon meeting and finally interviewing years later, and learning lessons from them that I could then apply to my own work in my own life. And then while I was going to these conventions, I started connecting with indie filmmakers who shared similar aesthetics and interests and visions to mine. And it kind of went from there. I started working on other people's movies until I talked someone into letting me write a movie for them. And here we are, many, many years later. I remember once that I jokingly said, like, I kind of want to be the gay Roger Corman. And I don't know if I still think that, because I want to be the first Michael Varrati, but the sentiment, the sentiment is there. The idea that, like, make a movie and make another one, and while you're finishing that one, make another one. Keep making it, because this is the dream,
Yeah. So I really want to talk to you about your short Unusual Attachment, which came out during quarantine, and you directed it in quarantine, correct?
Correct. That is true.
Can you tell listeners a little bit what it's about before we start talking about it?
Sure. Unusual Attachment is a story about a guy who is on a very seedy, shall we say, website that's like a chat roulette or a sex roulette kind of website, where it scrolls through and it connects you with a random guy. And then, you can yay or nay that person, and it will move on to the next. And before the movie starts, he has met someone on this otherwise unseemly webpage that he was spending an evening scrolling, that he feels he has made a romantic connection with, and that this is like it. Like, somehow, against all odds, on this sex site, I've found love. But right before they're about to exchange information, there's like a surge, and they don't get to exchange info. So he has been scrolling through this chat roulette site to try and hopefully find the person again, so they can reconnect in this sort of like gay sex site Nancy Meyers way, and so the movie is about that, where he tells his friend, this is what I'm doing with my night. And his friend is like, that's crazy, but like, you do you, girl. And he sets off on this journey, and like all the weirdo and fun and wild and wacky people he interacts along the way. But because it's me, and I like to kind of do genre twists, at some point he sort of encounters something that he wishes he hadn't. It's sort of like he went looking for one thing, and something else ends up finding him. And then we take it into a darker place, about sort of like a be careful what you look for online, tale.
The horrors of finding love in a digital world.
So I love this short because obviously I'm a found footage person and a second screen horror person. And I've been on this like kind of like bent of being like, quarantine found footage horror is so important, and like there's all these things coming out, and your short film is one of the primary examples I talk about, and like the importance of found footage and like the creativity it allows filmmakers. And so I would just like love to hear about what it was like to direct that movie, and what it was like to work with a graphics person to get that interface as good as it is.
Yeah, so the idea for Unusual Attachment actually came about fairly early on into the quarantine, lockdown, stay at home, whatever phrase people want to use. I do pretty much often have projects that are in motion, whatever that means. Everybody who is involved in the world of film knows that film either moves glacially slow or very fast, and there's really no in between. So it's often good if you are someone who wants to keep working to have a few things going, because you don't know what the next thing's going to be. And I had actually been in the process of shooting a new project out in the world when all of this happened, like an actual, like on-set film. And that movie shut down with no real idea of when and if we can come back and do it. But not only did that movie shut down, all the other things I was working on were suddenly ground to a halt, postponed. I don't want to say canceled, but mostly just, we don't know. And so most, like everybody, I had spent some time on those first few weeks just kind of like walking around my place, staring at the wall, not sure what to do. But my inclination whenever I'm uncertain is to make something. And here's a world that's telling you, well, you can't go outside. How can you make something? And I started obsessing about that. I was like, well, what if I can? And what if the things that are the restraints, the disadvantages, what if we could find a way to make them into an advantage? And I called my production partner, Brandon Kirby, and I was like, I have an idea that we make a short in quarantine without ever leaving our homes. I said, but I need to make sure also that it's feasible. And one of our regular members of our team is this amazing artist. He usually is the cinematographer of things that I do when we're able to actually be on set, but he's also a brilliant post-production person, Andrew J. Sepperly. And Andrew does a lot of post-effects for Narcos on Netflix. He is,
oh, cool.
He's brilliant. And I said to him, I was like, can we do this? Because obviously, if we do it, I need your magic to help make that world real. And he was like, I'm very excited about it. Let's figure it out. So I then sat down and I thought, well, what is the one thing that's getting us all through this? It's our addiction to screens. It's our addiction to our online lives. And so I started really thinking about what that means, how much we invest in the internet to be our outlet, to be a avatar and a representation of who we are, and how we invest so much of our hopes and our dreams and our sexual identities, if that's what you're using it for. And I was thinking about what that looks like in a queer story and a horror story, and how that would manifest, and Unusual Attachment just kind of flowed out of that.
That's amazing. Oh, this makes me so happy, because this is like what I love about like I said, found footage and second screen horror, and the way that like you were just able to make something without leaving your apartment, and it's so good and it looks amazing, and it's just such an accomplishment and such a feat, and I just think it's amazing.
Well, thank you. And it was really great for us too, because it did force our hand to learn new things. I mean, there were things that I would have never have thought to do, that I had to figure out. And one of them is, how do you work with actors and set a scene when you can't even be together? And so one of the things I think that people don't realize, it was a little more complicated than it may seem when you watch the short, because what I was committed to doing was making it as an authentic and on-set experience as possible, considering the constraints that we had. So we literally developed a digital set. And what that was is like we used a platform like Zoom, where I would zoom in, Andrew as, cinematographer / lighting, consultant would also be on. And then we would have the actor there. And before we would even do the scene, we would work with the actor to look at the things they had in their home that would be in the frame and the lighting that they had in their home to set up a shot to make it work. So like many people involved in this project who definitely deserve a lot of love and a tip of the hat are the partners, the spouses, and the roommates of some of our actors who became de facto crew members because they would like be rushing around, like setting up a lamp or, you know, a ring light or something that just happened to have been in the garage to make it work. And then once that was all set, then we would do the scene. And all of the scenes were done individually, where it was just me and the actor. And then we digitally created the landscape afterwards. But it was very much everybody was kind of all in and everybody had to be working together to make it happen. So
that's amazing. That is so cool to hear about that.
It really is. What amazes me is the creativity that people are being forced to do to continue creating content right now in such a closed off world. And it watching this short made me really happy because there's so much like productions being canceled or being like slowed down and movies aren't coming out. So to see that it's still possible to make something right now is just it's kind of life affirming in a time of a lot of depressingness.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you very much. And that's something that we wanted to do. Like we made this for as much for us as anybody else because we wanted to feel like we were doing something. But also there's a matter of pride now in the way that when we look back on this moment in time, when the world was shut down and no one seemingly was able to do something, we have a thing that we made, like, and we can point at it and look at it. And I'm very, very grateful. And I always say that, good filmmaking is a collaborative effort. And it is important when you are an artist to find your people. And I have such a wonderful group of people that when these ideas get thrown out, they're all in. Because it's not just the behind the scenes crew. I do tend to, anybody who watches my work knows I do work with a lot of the same actors. We have like a little family and a troupe, and that's not a mistake. It's like, I know that when I pick up the phone and I call Ben Bauer, who is not only the lead of Unusual Attachment, but also Office is Mine and A Halloween Trick, that I'm like, Ben, I want to do this. And Ben's just like, cool, let's go, and that's great. There's something about that just is really affirming artistically, creatively, but on a human level as well.
Yeah. Speaking of A Halloween Trick, that's currently playing on Deku, right?
Correct. Yes.
It made me laugh so hard watching this because I think because the whole premise is that he's having like people over and he's having really loud sex and his next door neighbor is constantly being woken up. And as someone that has lived in an apartment with incredibly thin walls where I had someone ask me if I was okay because I got food poisoning and was vomiting one night, it's such a funny and relatable short film that really kind of takes a very darkly comedic turn. And Brian is hilarious in it.
Yeah, what's interesting about A Halloween Trick, Unusual Attachment, The Office is Mine, and a lot of the work that I do and am interested in outside of the work that I do for studio or network, the projects that are more homegrown and developed by me and my team, is that we're interested in sort of the queer experience, but I'm a horror filmmaker, and I'm interested in how horror and the queer experience can be woven together for social commentary. I've spent a lot of time going to LGBTQ film festivals, and we tend to see a lot of the same storylines. And there's nothing against that or anything wrong with that. We need coming out movies. We need cute, life-affirming films. But I also am interested in the aspects of our community that those movies tend to overlook or gloss past. And I understand that, for some people, there's a reason for that. They don't necessarily want us to address maybe our darker side because there's still, a modicum and measure of acceptance that, we need to see on screen as well. And, also there's kind of the conversation and trope of kill your gays. But one thing that we do at June Gloom Productions, and my production company, is 99.9% of all of our characters in our stories are queer characters. So when you do that and you live in a predominantly queer world, you can then start digging into the other stuff. And that's what we really are interested in. The Office Is Mine is literally a story about territorialism and how gay men are often territorial with each other when in fact we should be raising each other up. A Halloween Trick is a story really about being kind and, having consideration for others in your community, and how we often see folks who don't do that. And, this extends into a lot of the work that we do, not just mine. My production partner and my co-founder of June Gloom, in his work, he does that too. He recently made a short called Is This a Date?, which is literally exactly what it sounds like. It's that experience that a lot of queer people have when they're spending time with each other and questioning, is this me just hanging out with someone, or is this a date? Yeah. And so we really, really like digging into the nuances of the things that we're technically not supposed to talk about, but we all experience. And, horror allows us to do that a little bit, and I'm all for it.
Yeah, same. I think that's what I appreciated about watching all three of these, is that the characters are messy. They feel real in that regard, because like if we're just continually to make queer movies about coming out, that's all we're gonna keep seeing. We gotta like do something to push forward and create different art. And I loved some of the things that are going on in these shorts. Like one of the lines I wrote down that just killed me was when in The Office Is Mine, the main character is basically, he wants to be the gay guy in the office, because without that he's just another boring white guy, he thinks. And it kind of points to that kind of, well, as you said, the territorialism of wanting to be that kind of special person in the office, but at the same time, if you're the only special person in the office, you're the only representation of that.
Yeah, and it's something that I think a lot of people have experienced but don't want to talk about. We've been very lucky with The Office Is Mine because it's had a very long life on the film festival circuit, and it keeps getting program places. And a great joy of mine is when it does, I do hear from people who say, this happened to me in my workplace. And I'm always like, well, I hope it didn't happen exactly like that. But, the idea is that, yeah, I remember thinking when I first was out of college and took my first job, how grateful I would have been to find out there was another gay person in the office.
Right.
But now people are fighting about who's the gayest gay in the office, and how preposterous is that? Like, that doesn't make sense,
Well, it's sort of like self-tokenism.
Exactly.
And I also had kind of question about, how did you get involved with the Boulet brothers' Dragula? Because you directed the kill sequences in the third season, is that correct?
I primarily did the intros. So
intros.
Yeah, all the vignettes that open the episodes were written and directed by me. And I did also direct some segments of the actual reality competition. For example, the crowning at the end of season 3, I directed. How I got involved with them was drag and horror have a lot of intersection, but in the intersection that it has, it's a very small world. Mm-hmm. And I do a lot of work with Peaches Christ. She's an old friend and a frequent collaborator. And through Peaches, I've gotten to know a lot of drag artists across the country and have intersected with a lot of drag artists across the country. And the Boulet brothers have always occupied a very special and important place on the nightlife circuit, because not many people do the kind of things that they do. And when I first moved to LA, one of the first places that I went to was Dragula when it existed as a nightclub party. I had gone initially because Peaches was in town and was guest hosting with them. And I was like, well, I got to go and find out what this is all about. So I originally met them through Peaches, and then someone that I also know very closely through that circle is Darren Stein, the writer-director of Jawbreaker.
In GBF.
Yeah, in GBF. And Darren produced Peach's movie All About Evil, and Peaches had introduced me to Darren, and Darren and I have been very good friends for a long time. And the Boulets started coming to these drag race and movie nights at Darren's place, and that's where we really connected and started talking about horror and queerness and just sort of our life experiences, and we realized that we were very kindred spirits. And after season 2 came out, they had reached out to me about potentially working with them and doing some writing for the show. But and I was in. I was like, well, this is really cool. But it was sort of a long journey because there was a bit of a pause between season 2 and season 3, and tends to happen in the world of film and TV. You know, you're not really sure if something's happening till it's happening. So we had our initial meeting. We would see each other out and about. And then when the season 3 call came through, it was like, and we're off. And it was quite an adventure, you know, to be in the rooms when we talked about the extermination challenges and like what the aesthetics of the episodes would look like, because there are only 2 directors on the entirety of the season of season 3. It's me and the other director, Nathan Noyes. And then I did all of the writing for the intros, and also a lot of writing for like the more official scripted segments of the show. So I was very, very involved in the process, and I really, really love working with them because it's, as I said way back a few minutes ago, it's about finding your people. And Swan Drac and I just get each other. It's like I really love when I get a phone call from them and they're like, we were thinking about blank. And I'm like, yeah, let's do it. But here's all the extra blood that we need to add. And they're like, cool. And, you know, so, and I talk to them quite frequently and I love working with them, and we are barely getting started. That's all I will say.
That's awesome.
Oh, that's so fucking cool.
That's so good.
Terry, you want to talk about what we've been watching recently?
Sure. So I have been watching a bunch of kind of bad slashers that Arrow has put out, and I was kind of getting tired of watching them. So
that's fair.
I switched and I tried something new, which turned out to be very good, called Next of Kin from 1982.
Ooh.
Have you guys heard of this one?
That sounds familiar. I'm going to look it up while you talk about it.
It's an Australia horror mystery that is definitely gothic in nature, where this woman, her mother dies, and she was estranged from her mom, and when she died, she inherited her mom's basically old manor that was basically a rest home for elderly people, and so she ends up going back to this small town in Australia to run it and decide what she's going to do with it, if she's going to keep running it or if she's going to sell it or whatever the case may be. And she starts reading her mother's diary about these creepy events that happened throughout her life in this manner, and then the events that are happening in the diary begin to happen to the daughter, including deaths that are actually kind of not gruesome and gory, but they kind of, if you guys have seen like The Changeling, kind of like the bathtub water scene with like the kid that's drowning in the tub, sort of like that in this. And there's some like really striking imagery, but it's basically kind of that kind of gothic manner, am I going crazy, past, present kind of melding into one that almost takes on a slasher vibe at some point. It's really good. I really, really enjoyed it. It's a slow burn for sure, but it kind of pays off in the ending.
Was it an Arrow release?
No.
Okay.
I don't remember who released this Blu-ray.
I believe Severin put it out.
Severin, yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I saw it a couple years ago. It's interesting because I think that some of the marketing that was done around the movie is not incorrect, but it leads you to think it's something that it's not. Because I remember very heavily people tried to say it was like an Australian giallo, but I think it's much more than that. It's atmospheric though. It really is.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I don't remember where I first heard about it. It might have been Elric Kane on Shockwaves talking about it from when he was a kid seeing it. But it's definitely a slow burn. And I heard, like, when I was reading stuff about it before I watched it, they were talking about it's a slasher. And I mean, like, the last third of it might be sort of kind of in that mystery vein, but it feels more like kind of a gothic ghost story, but not a ghost story at the same time. It's a weird film.
That sounds awesome, though.
But I really dug it. And then the new movie I saw is a movie that is coming out in August called Sputnik.
Oh,
it's a Russian film, and it takes place in, like, I want to say it was 1983. It takes place in the 80s, and it is about this astronaut that is returning home from space with his astronaut partner, and something happens on their ride down that ends up killing his partner and severely injuring him. And he gets put into this, like, containment place, this building while they're studying him, and this woman who is kind of interested in, like, neurology and science, and they call her in as a specialist to basically look after him and find out what is going on. But what you find out is that, and this isn't a spoiler, because it happens very quickly, is that in a kind of like alien homage, he has this creature that is living inside of him that he vomits up at night. And he doesn't realize that he's vomiting it up. And it's this really awesome creature design. It's totally computer generated, but it looks really fucking rad. And it's almost like a snake with arms and spider eyes. It's really kind of, it's very striking. And they're trying to figure out if it's like an alien, if it's a parasite, or if it's more of a symbiotic relationship with this man. And she wants to try to, like, separate it from it, while the people that are housing him might have ulterior motives. I found it to be really, really, really good. It's one of the better kind of, like, alien riffs I've seen. I think it kind of loses its way in the third act a bit. But man, it's a great, I think, feature debut from this guy named Igor Abramenko.
Awesome.
And I really dug it. And that should be out on VOD sometime in August. But those are the two that I saw. What about you, Mary Beth?
So I recently watched the Shudder film Host, which is coming out. It'll be out by the time this episode goes out. But it's a perfect movie. I think maybe that's a little bit dramatic, but, like, it is absolutely phenomenal. It's actually it's directed by Rob Savage, who initially released a short Zoom horror film on Twitter, and it was all based in Zoom. And that short is Host. It got turned into a full-length feature, and by full-length I mean it's 56 minutes, which is, like, a perfect runtime. And so it's like, and I'm so glad it stayed at 56 minutes, because it didn't overstay its welcome. It didn't try to, like, become overly long. It knew exactly what it wanted to accomplish, and it didn't, like, there wasn't a care paid to how long it was in terms of, like, making it longer. But 6 friends are in quarantine, and they want to see each other, so they have a seance over Zoom. And as you can probably imagine, things go horribly awry. It's the way that they're able to, like, kind of craft scares remotely like this is absolutely phenomenal. It has, and the way that it plays with, you know, like, changing your background in Zoom, playing with filters in Zoom, the way that the whole film plays with what we are become so familiar with and what we find comfort in right now and makes it horrifying, similar to Unusual Attachment, is absolutely amazing. And it is scary, and it uses a lot of found footage tropes, but in a new way. It doesn't make it seem tired, and I know that Terry has seen this movie. Michael, have you got an opportunity to see it at all?
I have not, although I'm very interested.
It's really, really good.
It's one of the best found footage movies I've seen, and I'm not a fan of the subgenre too much, but I'm coming around on it. But it is one of the best I've seen. I loved all 56 minutes of it, and I'm glad that it's not a minute longer. It's the perfect length.
It is. Michael, have you seen The Den?
No, I know about it, but I haven't. You know what the sad truth is, and I always tell people I'm probably a buzzkill when it comes to coming on shows and talking about recent movies or more recent movies, is like I always feel like I'm always working on something, so I'm always behind. And
that makes sense. Yeah.
And then I tell people I'm still catching up on shows that were on the WB, not CW, but the WB. So it's like. One of these days. The Den is another second screen horror film. It's really good. This is like very similar to that and like knocks it out of the park. Besides that, I've been reading a really good book that just came out actually called Devolution. It is by Max Brooks, who did the Zombie Survival Guide and World War Z. And it is basically found footage, the book, with Bigfoot. And it is basically told from the perspective of a found diary of a woman who lives in a secluded community. And there is Mount Rainier erupts and it forces all of the animals out of their usual habitat, including a tribe of Bigfoots, big feet. I still don't know the plural. But it can kind of sound ridiculous because I know that Bigfoot can be like silly, but the way it is written is so compelling and so fascinating and also really scary because it really emphasizes our obsession and dependence on technology and what happens when that technology is revoked and and how helpless we really are because we don't really know how to do anything without phones, without electricity, without access to delivery stuff. And so it's really, really good. I'm almost finished with it, but it is basically like found footage, the book with a journal and then some interviews by the narrator and scare quotes that are like interjected throughout to add more context to the search for these people, to the legend of Bigfoot, to the lore of Bigfoot. And all of my cryptid lovers out there should really check it out. And even if you don't like cryptids, this is and you liked World War Z, please check it out. Max Brooks' style is so good. So I would recommend that. It came out just a couple weeks ago. So it's so
There's
good.
a lot of books that have just come out that I really want to check out because I know Paul Tremblay's new book came out.
I know. There's too many books. There's too many movies. And it's like, I shouldn't have an excuse in quarantine, but I feel like you get overwhelmed with the choices and then you just watch the same shit.
Well, yeah. I also think too, especially when it comes to reading, you have to find that right book that catches you because, I was talking earlier about screen engagement, but it's really how we are connecting with the world, period, right now. And I think that people don't realize you are reading all day long, even if you're not engaged reading, that sometimes it's hard to sit and read a book unless you're really, really ready to read a book because what you don't realize is you've been doing emails and reading the news and, on Twitter. So I get it. You have to find that perfect storm.
So, but this is a book that has captured my attention and I haven't been able to put it down. I've actually been, instead of scrolling through my phone at night, actually putting my phone on Do Not Disturb mode and reading the book and then going to bed after reading, which has been a phenomenal relief for my brain. And I encourage everyone to try it because boy, oh boy, it's helpful. Michael, what have you been watching recently?
The most recent thing that I watched that I'm still thinking about actually was a documentary called Mrs. Vera's Daybook. And Mrs. Vera is a San Francisco institution. She is a drag artist and a visual artist and a performance artist who is known very much for very, very outlandish, colorful almost otherworldly looks. And she has this sort of enclave in collective called the Verosphere, and anybody can be part of the Verosphere. You know, when they do the Pride Parade, for a week in advance, they'll like put costumes on people and fit them and get everybody part of these like outlandish, alien, otherworldly looking things to just kind of show that everybody belongs. And she has been sort of a staple of the San Francisco scene, and recently was made the Grand Marshal of the Pride Parade there. But what makes the story really interesting is that it does what so many of these stories do, and it taps into a lot of queer history, because Mrs. Vera and her partner David really initially met during the AIDS crisis, and they had lost so many people around them, and David himself was ill and is ill, and is afflicted with HIV/AIDS, and they didn't know day to day what they, what would, if they were going to make it, and so Mrs. Vera's daybook is literally, it's like every day, let's go out and photograph this outrageous character. And that's the photo for the day, and so it's all about like, living day to day and finding the beauty of day to day, and how that spirit moved past them and instilled itself into a community of finding the beauty of community and each other, and helping each other use art and creativity to thrive. And I really am drawn to these kind of stories because I'm very interested in queer history. And San Francisco, I always, I love LA, and LA is my home, and I love living here, but I've always had an affair with San Francisco because it is an epicenter of so much of that queer history that has affected everything else. I mean, if you go back to when the Cockettes were doing their shows they drew the attention of Divine and Sylvester and John Waters, and this kind of cultural queer revolution that brought people to look at drag in a different way. And there are all these micro stories of people going to this city and creating these identities that may to the outside world seem outre and strange, but were in fact authentic and powerful personal creations to escape a world that was shutting them out. And I really have such a great affinity for the Mrs. Veras of the world, and their place in our fabric, in our history. And so seeing this documentary was really great, because I know a lot about a lot of different queer contributors to history, and it was nice to see her story preserved and their story preserved. Mrs. Vera lives in the same building that Peaches Christ lives in, so I've seen her a few times here and there, and it was just kind of cool. It was like to watch that legacy in documentary form. And I apologize for rambling on about it in this sort of like nostalgic way. It was produced by KQED, which is sort of public television here in California, and is available to watch in its entirety on their YouTube channel. So if people want to go check out this documentary,
I was going to ask.
It's definitely something to dig into. Now, for more of a horror aspect of things, I've been reading David Wong's third book in the John Dies at the End cycle. I don't know, like it's not a trilogy because I think there's another one coming. And I've really been enjoying that because I just love that sort of like stoner meets Lovecraft meets otherworldly creepiness. And I'm about halfway through. I wish I could tell you like, what the plot was so far, but that's kind of the hallmark of what these books are. So
yeah.
What is this one called?
This one is called What the Hell Did I Just Read?
What the Hell Did I Just Read? Yeah. I love. I've only read John Dies at the End, and I really enjoyed it. But like the titles for his books, like the second one, that this book is full of spiders. Seriously, dude, don't touch it. Like it just like speaks to me.
Yeah, I mean it's great, and I grew up loving Douglas Adams. He was one of my favorite authors, and I always loved how Douglas Adams would like infuse this sense of whimsy with actual serious science fiction. Like there's real sci-fi plot, but with these kind of characters that are quirky and weird. And in a way, David Wong really does the same thing in the world of Lovecraftian horror. Like, if you tried to sell this to me and I didn't know what it was, you'd be like, well, they're kind of like bro dude stoner guys, like, who are idiots in solving crimes. I'd be like, not for me. But they're so kind of affable and lovable, and then when you like have a monster made of meat and like a giant tentacle, like that, then you're like, okay, I'm kind of back. And like, he knows that these guys should not be saving the world. And I've always sort of loved a story of like the anti-chosen one. Like, obviously I love Buffy and things like that, but I'm more interested on someone who accidentally gets picked and like the onus of having to save everybody and how terrible that would be. Because even for people who are chosen in these storylines, it's never great. So imagine if you were not equipped for it and you got picked anyway.
Yeah, I remember seeing the movie before I read the book, the original one, and it started my love affair with Chase Williamson. But the book is, I thought it was so fun. I don't know why I stopped reading it, but this one is good. You said you're about halfway through it.
Yeah, it is good. I mean, it begins with a child abduction, and as you know, all of their stories tend to have like some dark impetus that begins it. Like I said, it's wacky characters and otherwise very serious plot, and then they kind of go off, and there are doppelgangers and mysterious like fish people, and it's just like, I love it. I'm living for it. And this book is full of spiders. Seriously, dude, don't touch it. Is sort of the John dies at the end version of a zombie apocalypse book. So I definitely recommend that as well.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Hell yeah. So we have talked about what we've been watching recently, but Michael, what movie have you brought with you today to talk about?
I have brought 1990's Flatliners, directed by the sensational Joel Schumacher.
Today's a good day to die.
Flatline.
30 seconds to go.
Can you recall any specific emotion or sensation?
No, but there's something out there.
We're running out of time.
300, clear. Nothing. Your heart, go again. Clear. Nothing, I can't hear anything. Come on, Nelson. Breathe. We lost him. No!
Welcome back, man.
I'm going next.
2 minutes.
2:10.
Was there anything negative about your experience?
This is too weird. We've experienced death. Now somehow we brought our sins back physically.
That is not hallucination, and it is not possible.
Oh my God.
You withheld information. That's the same as lying.
You wouldn't have done it. At least we would have had a choice. You're not real.
Hey, come on, they're your sins. Live with them. I do.
No! Nelson, please!
I thought I paid my dues.
Thank you for the nightmare.
No! Come on, Joe! Starting CPR. 1,000, 2,000. Damn it!
Flatliners. Some lines shouldn't be crossed.
Rest in peace, Joel Schumacher. So for those of you unfamiliar with Flatliners, we'll give you a quick synopsis. So in Flatliners, 5 rich white Ivy Leaguers get bored and begin to experiment with near-death experiences until the dark consequences of past tragedies begin to jeopardize their lives. Dun, dun, dun. So, Michael, how old were you when you first saw Flatliners? Tell us about the experience.
It's interesting because I think this movie probably ties in a little bit to those Frady Cat years, but it had to have been after that because I watched it, obviously. Flatliners came out in 90. I think I saw it during the boon of late night cable because that's how I ingested a lot of horror and genre films back in the day. So I think I saw it around 93. Or maybe a little thereafter, 90, 92, I don't know. Irrelevant. I was probably like 9 or 10. And I had seen horror movies up to this point and really was into them. But the gravity that this film gave to the supernatural elements of it really, for some reason, resonated with me to the degree that when I rewatched it for this podcast, I still kind of felt an unease, which I liked. I really was, because that doesn't happen very often with me anymore. But the standout, and I know that we'll dig into the different aspects of the plot, that really stuck with me was the I guess ghost, for lack of a better term, of Billy Mahoney, the boy in the red hoodie.
Yeah.
That scared the shit out of me as a kid. Like, there was just something about the rage of innocence lost that really affected me. And just that anger. And it scared me, but it also made me, I think, profoundly sad, and in a way that I had not really been affected. Because, you know, when you watch horror movies, especially during that time, if you're watching like Friday the 13th or Halloween or whatever, there's a point when the sequels are sort of like increased body count, like popcorn shovel in your mouth movies. Whereas this movie like really handles death with severity. And and that shook me, because, you know, there was a lot of stuff. And like, I'm not going to equate these two too much, but when I was young, I had a friend who was killed in a freak accident, and it was very unfortunate, and it was something that was very affecting to me. But then to not long thereafter see this movie about the rage of the ghost of a boy who really didn't get to live his life, that was a punch in the gut, you know? And it left me very, very shaken. And I don't know. I've always, like, it's weird because people always ask when you make horror movies, well, what's a horror movie that scared you? And this movie's always the movie that comes to mind. And I really, looking back on it, it's not necessarily a terrifying movie, but there's something about it that really gets me personally.
For sure. I see that a lot in this movie. I thought I had seen this as a child. I think I got it mixed up with Stir of Echoes, another Kevin Bacon ghost movie. I don't know why, but I definitely had seen the beginning when Kiefer Sutherland says it's a beautiful day to die, or a perfect day to die, and I was like, yes, erotic. I love it. But it really is pretty creepy, and it gets under your skin in a way that I wasn't expecting, I think.
Yeah, I was trying to think when I was watching this, when I first saw this, because I remember it came out in 90, and so I know I didn't see it in theaters, but I know I saw it with my parents, and I don't remember if we watched the whole thing, because like it was at this time when my parents were very strict about what we were watching, and I think this might have been a movie that they thought that they would have let me watch, and then it started to get into really kind of weird, creepy territory, and so I think they stopped it and then watched it after I went to bed, because I was trying to remember, and like only bits and pieces of this movie would come back to me. I remember the Mahoney, like it doesn't surprise me that is kind of what got you as a kid, Michael, because that's all I remember is that image of when Kiefer Sutherland's character Nelson is walking through like almost like the subway, and he turns around the corner, and then there's this kid just sort of standing there staring at him, and then he kicks him in the balls and starts beating him up. But like for some reason I remember that sequence, and that is about all I remember from watching this as a kid.
What a wild scene to remember.
I know.
Also, like, I guess I'm not as familiar with Joel Schumacher's filmography, but I love his style of filmmaking. Like, this movie is stunning to look at. And, like, beautiful in a weird, campy way.
No, it's really a visually beautiful film, and I think that it is interesting that pop culture really decided that it was going to remember him more for movies that were in the mainstream considered failures or, you know, critically ill-received. But that is sort of a very odd way to take on his career, because when you look at the stamp of a filmmaker who really puts a style all their own to a movie, there's something special about that. And even watching this, the scene where Nelson's sitting in the back of the Kevin Bacon's truck while they're all inside, and there's like the neon graffitied faces on the wall.
Yes.
When I was sitting watching it last night, I said to myself, I was like, well, that's Gotham City.
Right.
Yes.
That's the impetus for his Batman movies.
Right. Before, like, a full few years before, like 5 or 6 years before he even did Batman, there it is. I mean, that whole, how he shoots Chicago is Gotham City. It's always, there's always something steaming. There's always something gothic and sad. And it then makes you realize, oh, he wasn't trying to affect Gotham City. In Batman Forever and Batman and Robin, Gotham City was just Joel Schumacher giving us Joel Schumacher, which is even cooler as far as I'm concerned.
I agree 100%.
Yeah, what really jumped out at me as an adult watching this was the gothic nature of the structures. Like, it's the way it opens up with that orchestral song, and it's like close-ups of all of these like statues. It's very, it has that kind of, well, Gotham City vibe that would later become his Gotham City. But it's so interesting to see his stamp on movies as an adult watching, because like recently I rewatched The Lost Boys and seeing like his connection with all these movies and the way that you can tell, yep, this is a Joel Schumacher movie it's pretty cool.
Well, there's an opulence, I think, to what he does,
yes,
which I think is really, really rare to find in American filmmakers, in that he imbued his movies with excess. And there are very few filmmakers that I can think of that do that well. Paul Verhoeven is maybe one of the only other ones that immediately comes to mind. And he's not an American filmmaker. But the thing is Joel Schumacher definitely had a more is more sensibility. And I love that. I think, he not only gave you a movie, he gave you a movie. And you talk about that opening with the Gothic choir and the gargoyles and this very, very intense Gothic imagery. And then it immediately transitions to this hallway of a hospital with neon lit archways.
Neon lit, yes.
Yeah, it's like he wants you to know that you are in his world now, whatever that may be.
It's almost like a hyper reality, like the way things are filmed in that every little scene has kind of a stake to it.
Can we talk about how erotic this movie is?
Yeah, I saw you tweeting about the eroticism of this movie, and I have been very excited to get that take.
Yeah, Mary Beth, what's going on there?
I think I might just be horny, but like I think especially the beginning of this, like the beginnings of this film, not even the beginnings, like the whole thing is just like a lot of touching and caressing bodies that are half naked, and a lot of like, okay, orgasms are called the little death, le petit mort. These people are going through a little death. They are dying and coming back to life. And there's this moment where they gasp and come back to life, and everyone's hovering over them, like smiling and kind of panting. And like, it's just kind of hot in a really weird, fucked up kind of way, where it's like, I see this like kind of parallel between orgasms and this flatlining, and I might be crazy, like very much so. But that was how I was reading it last night. And there's like this sexual tension between the, Nelson, Kevin Bacon's character, and Julia Roberts' character, and there's like threesome of tension that's really crazy. And then there's also the scumbag Baldwin character who's awful. But it's just, the energy of that movie was much more erotic than I was expecting, and like much sexier than I was expecting, which was kind of weird, but I kind of dug it in a way, if that makes sense. Does that make any sense to anybody?
Well, I mean, even you and I went.
No, Mary Beth, you're fucking crazy.
Well, I mean, even when you and I were talking a little bit offline, Mary Beth, the way that they sort of like bet on being dead, it's almost like edging. Like they just want to edge it a little bit further and like see how far they can go before that final release of this little orgasmic coming back to life.
Right? I mean,
are we crazy, Michael?
No, I think that's. Really, this movie is transgressive all around. And obviously, when you deal with this kind of material, there's a sexual undercurrent, because it's all about posturing. It's all about power. I'm not saying it's sexual in a good way, but you're seeing how, or I'm not even necessarily saying it's sexual in a bad way. It's all about how the people are positioning themselves within the group and amongst each other to kind of get that ultimate rush. And in this case, that is riding that lightning line of death. And, when sex itself is dealt with in the movie, it's specifically through the lens of Baldwin's character. What's interesting, when he is found out for kind of being the creep that he is, and the fact that he's been taping women in sexual situations, when his fiance confronts him, who was played brilliantly in a very small, unforgiving role by Hope Davis, she even says she didn't care that he was having sex with people. She cares that he abused their trust.
Yes.
So the movie's not even necessarily a sexual shaming movie. It's all about, if you're going to do it, own your sexuality. Don't put other people on the line for it. And I think that's interesting.
That's really cool. I hadn't actually thought about it that way, but that is also really interesting. Again, because it's not like in horror when they're like, oh, sex is bad. It's more like you said, not having that trust and not like being respectful in that sex, and like owning your sexuality is the bad part. Is the bad thing. And also, I guess I saw the eroticism. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I saw that eroticism also in Billy Baldwin's death moment. I don't know what we want to call that. The moment where he's dead, and it obviously like very much based on his obsession with sex, because you have like him being born and the close up on I think it's his mother's breast when the baby is born, and it's like this very interesting look at a complicated character that I hated, but also maybe there's like it could have been like more to him in terms of his weird relationship with sex and how he feels about his own sexuality, and maybe there's a shame around it that isn't maybe there's a shame around it that he doesn't talk about as much.
Well, it's interesting in their deathscapes, I guess we could call them, that like really you don't think about while you're watching the movie, but when you consider it back, everybody else's death experience when they're sort of in that world of dead is broad. Like, when you see into Kevin Bacon's character David, it's like it's floating over like the Himalayas and these like wide open expanses, and then it like takes him to school and through childhood, and he's sort of traveling. And when we see Kiefer Sutherland, it's that rolling shot of the field and like through the thing to the tree and like this great big expanse. But with Billy Baldwin, it's very closed and it's very small, and it's just women and sexuality in a dark black and white square. And, even Julia Roberts' thing, which is like family, like she goes outside, she travels the house. Billy Baldwin's character is literally in a box. So in a way, I get what you're saying, because there's not much to him in a way. And maybe there's something tragic about it, even if we don't agree with what he has done, because the summation of his life is fit into this little dark place where everyone else is a wide breadth of something else.
Yeah. Well, and what I found interesting also about his deathscape is the, I like that term, his when at first it's like we see him coming out of his mom, and then like his mom's breast, and we see his mom like shaking something in front of him, and then the way the hands are grabbing, even as they're an adult, it's like a little kid grabbing at something, and he's grabbing it at all these women, and it definitely kind of like it kind of pulls into that kind of like Oedipal complex that Freud would talk about, where it's like he's equating all of this femininity, because he even talks about how his afterlife felt very feminine, like there's a feminine force guiding him. And it's like, when you see what is actually happening, he's just trying to grab at all these women. It doesn't matter if they are his mom when he's trying to feed, or whether it's him as an adult trying to go through woman after woman and rack up his videotapes. It's tragic, it's sad, but it's also really kind of fucked up and disturbing.
Well, and also, I guess this is a good place where I kind of want to talk about the inconsistency, I think, with like the consequences and the punishments and the kind of regrets that they all live with, because I think that was my biggest complaint about the movie, is it felt that like these things that they were grappling with were weirdly inconsistent. Does that make sense? Like I guess to me, it's like, okay, so Nelson straight up murdered a kid, and gets tortured by a ghost. And then Billy Baldwin's character films women, a ton of women, without their consent, and his consequence is just his fiance leaves him.
Yeah, he gets nothing out of it. Like, where's his like body torture?
Yeah, and I feel like the spectrum of like what people are experiencing is so. And then like Kevin Bacon's character just had to go apologize to the young girl that he teased. It felt very weirdly like they were all had a similar experience, but all had like drastically different like reasons they were being tortured, but it felt tonally inconsistent to me. If that, like, I don't know, what are you guys' thoughts about that whole, like, how that was handled?
Well, I think that, yeah, I wouldn't disagree. I think that also, though, it is sort of a failing of the movie in that it introduced such a nuanced ensemble, but you cannot have all of them have the same experience, because then it just becomes like a Final Destination or something where like the same thing is happening to everybody. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, I guess that the thing was they're trying to make it seem that death is a personal experience, and you learn about it when you're supposed to, and you shouldn't learn about it before it's time, whatever that means. I don't know. I think that this movie is, even though it holds a great place in my heart for being a movie that terrorized me, and I also have a great fondness for because of that, there is probably the reason why it doesn't necessarily hold as a tentpole of the genre in terms of something that we time and again discuss, because there are, I think, some narrative issues. Like the concept of the movie is a bigger concept than maybe the execution, you know?
Yeah. I agree. And I kind of felt that way watching it this time. I was like, as I was watching, I could understand Nelson's desire to do this, and I sort of understood Rachel's a bit, but like every single time they pull someone under, it's like, and I get that this is purposeful. It's almost more difficult to bring them back, but at some point I'm like, okay, when are you guys gonna not do this? Because I don't understand your desire to kill yourself. Like Nelson, he wants this fame, and Rachel wants to see if her father is in a good place after he died. So I can understand that, but the other ones, I'm like, I don't quite understand your motivation for doing this, especially when every single time it almost seems like instead of getting easier for them to bring someone back, it gets harder.
Yeah.
Which is why I think Oliver Platt is our most sensible character, honestly.
He really is. And to be honest, which is kind of sad because he is a pretentious dick. The way he like talks into his little recorder about his greatness and about, he's like talking about, you know, the when he's trying to figure out the title of his book, and he comes up with all these different titles about like a man, you know, a doctor in progress and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, you are like a pretentious D-bag, but you're also the smartest one of these people.
What I like about the character work that was done by the writer, though, with Oliver Platt's character, is if you track how he talks to his tape recorder from the beginning of the movie to the end, is he starts off being very critical of everything, and much like Nelson, he becomes sort of delusions of grandeur, but it's all about his own narrative. So like he himself is still not like a good person per se, but like if you listen to what he says to himself at the beginning of the movie versus in the middle when they think they're onto something, his pretentiousness grows, and it's very, very smart to like subtly develop the character that way.
So the one dreamscape that like really kind of threw me for a loop this time watching it, because again, I don't remember this when I was a kid, but I was really concerned about what Rachel was going to find in that room. I don't know if this is just me, but the way it was filmed with like the red punch, the all-American hero, that like it's framed on her father's face, and like he has this like turn of the lip that like looks cruel, and then this room is like this secret room that she's not supposed to enter. I was really afraid of what was going on in there, and it was like, thank God it's just a drug use.
Oh my, thank God it's just drugs.
Yeah, like I seriously thought that he like was doing something inappropriate, like child pornography or like something like
true.
that. Like I really thought, I was like, oh my God, is this going to go into this icky direction with this character? Because I realized this time that her character is very like motherly, like as much as she is kind of almost like a conquest for Dave and Nelson in some bizarre fashion. She also is the one that's like always, she's staying with Dave after he comes back and is like taking care of him, and she's staying with Nelson, and it's almost this kind of like motherly vibe to her that I kind of feel like her character's a little wasted.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Though it's interesting, you can see them trying to build it into the character where it's like because her home was not good and it was like a broken situation, she's probably looking to be the mother that she didn't get to have, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if I agree, but I'm just saying I could see someone trying to make that argument.
Yeah, and I also feel like... So... Terry, I felt the way about her character and how it was like, okay, she's like the one girl, okay, cool, she's going to be like the sexual conquest for the dudes, blah, 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 take care of them. But I think what kind of redeemed her a little bit for me was that her story was more about forgiving, like understanding that her guilt was not necessary and that she needed to forgive herself rather than like she needed to ask for forgiveness. And I think I kind of liked that she was like the one character that wasn't like did a huge fuck up. Though again, like of course the woman is the one who didn't have a huge fuck up, whatever. But again, like I felt like I did kind of like that idea that she is more like forgiving herself, like I said, rather than having to like apologize for something or like repent for an action, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of like this idea of forgiveness, it's something that like I noticed this time and wrote down while I was watching is I think probably it's because we recently talked with Romola Gary about forgiveness in her movie Amulet, where what is the notion of forgiveness and is it something that can be given? And I was thinking about these characters who are only seeking forgiveness because their life depends on it.
Yeah, like they wouldn't have gone for this if they hadn't fucked around and killed.
Right.
Like, yeah, like they never would have thought.
Wasn't getting hit by a fucking hockey stick, or Dave is being called fellatio instead of labratio in his dreams. Would they have pursued this kind of trying to ask for forgiveness? It's kind of a weird thing.
It is a weird thing, and I don't think they would have. I think these are like what, 5 yuppie medical students who seem to have an aggressive amount of confidence around themselves and like think that they're hot shit and that they can't do anything wrong, especially like Kevin Bacon's character does something wrong at the beginning and he's suspended for 4 months and he's like, oh, it's not fair. I'm so mad. And so it's like, I think that they needed this literal death experience to understand that like they are human, they are fallible, like they have made mistakes. I kind of wish Oliver Platt had gotten that though, because he didn't get that. He didn't get the same treatment, and I kind of wish he had, but here we are.
No, it's definitely a tale about arrogance. In a way, like, I can see parallels to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with this.
Yes.
It's the idea of using science to play God and learning that maybe you should have stayed in your lane, for lack of a better term. And I get exactly what you're saying, Terry, because in the real world, we hope that people seek to do better and want to build upon themselves and improve for the sheer virtue of doing so and becoming better people. But a lot of times in horror and unfortunately in life, sometimes they have to be faced with consequences to do so. And Victor Frankenstein did not learn until too late that maybe he should not have been building a monster. And just like Mary Beth said, a group of yuppie kids maybe didn't learn that they shouldn't have been playing with death until death came knocking back. And I really kind of love the lesson learned there is that, sometimes if you touch the stove, you're going to get burned, but you have to touch the stove to learn not to.
That's true.
That is true. One thing that it's almost comical. Like I had this on in the background, and I just happened to look up as like a background today as I was doing some work, and I just happened to look up right as the world turned blue for Nelson, and the use of filters in this movie and the way that color is used is, I mean, we touched on a little bit with the idea of like the hospital that has that kind of orange neon glow, but the way color is used in this is I think very fascinating.
It's beautiful. I think too that the colors are very indicative of what's going to happen, which is a very very giallo mood. But like, if it's blue or it's red, you kind of know that some ghosty shit is abound. Whereas I think if it's got that golden hue, what's interesting about this movie, especially because it's a movie that is the movie I picked, is there's definitely some like Judeo-Christian themes, and that's not really something that I lean into in work that I do or usually even seek out. But, it's interesting how it lays out in the film. And when Julia Roberts hugs her dad, sort of the end of her haunting storyline, that filter goes from red to that golden hue. And it's almost like Joel Schumacher is indicating, here's the presence of God, and forgiveness. The idea, like with the color change, that warm light of acceptance, that's a brilliant art move, I think.
Yeah, and even when I have some problems with the script, I mean, you gotta the fact that he had is it Jean de Bont, being a cinematographer. I mean, what an inspired move! Like him and cameras are just like, they go hand in hand, and you could tell that this movie it kind of gives it a momentum. Even when sometimes I feel that the plot itself is a little repetitive, like we constantly are going back to the sequences of people dying and then being brought back to life and everything. But even through it all, there is a momentum because of Jean de Bont's cinematography.
I agree. I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, it's very visual and it's very well constructed. One thing that really struck me about this movie this go round, and like looking at all of the history of horror and things that followed, is that it feels in a lot of ways a very foundational movie for the next kind of phase of horror. Because we're coming out of the 80s, slasher's sort of done. And what's interesting is, when you look at the horror movies of the 80s, it was very much in vogue to have sort of like an array of young actors, maybe from TV, but usually not like big movie star names to be in horror movies. And then something like Flatliners, you get an ensemble of relatively well-known actors. And I kind of almost view it as a precursor to the later 90s, when it was the thing to cast an entire horror film with a bunch of people that because that didn't really happen a lot prior to this. And so I see sort of like use the hip stars of the time as the ensemble. But then I look at that operating room that they are doing their flatlining in, and all of the gothic like artistry and like, the tiles and the colors. And that was all built for the movie. I did my research, and I'm sort of like, oh, so they're doing the Scream ensemble on the set of a Dark Castle movie. It's sort of like, like literally like all of these things. And then, because I mentioned the Judeo-Christian themes, it's like, and now they're in like, the finale is accepting your fate in the universe, which is literally what goes on in the Conjuring universe. So it's like Flatliners is sort of an amalgamation of all of the like big horror tropes that followed later, encapsulated in one movie in 1990.
Yeah. That's
holy
true.
Shit, that is so true. Damn.
I have to bring up, have you guys seen the remake?
No.
/ sequel?
I haven't. I know that Ellen Page is in it, and that's about the extent of my knowledge.
Yes, I mean, it has a really good cast. Ellen Page, Diego Luna, Nina Dobrev, James Norton, Kiersey Clemens.
Well, they really did they tried to pull like the 90s thing of having like those people on like that on kind of ensemble cast.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely people that were either about ready to kind of hit it big or were doing like notable work at the time. And then Kiefer Sutherland is in it as well, playing a person that if you don't see a deleted scene is just an entirely different character, but in the deleted scene it kind of suggests that he is the character from the first Flatliners. It's really bizarre.
Okay.
It's not a very good movie. It's very much like taking an amalgamation of like Flatliners, mixing it with like a haunted house story. It's more about the kind of jump scare ghost parts, but it does something interesting in that the thing that I actually did kind of enjoy about it over the original is that there was more of a reason for them to want to do this, because when they kill themselves and then bring themselves back, it's almost like they get some kind of like they unlock a portion of their brain that was not there. So like they get smarter in school. And so Ellen Page's character, when she's kind of the Kiefer Sutherland of the group, when she does it, she's all of a sudden excelling at school. And it's such a tough school program that they're in, that like all of a sudden everyone else wants to do it because it's like making them a little bit smarter. So it almost felt like there was a little bit more of a push to why they would keep doing it, even though things don't go too well for them as in this old one. But yeah, it is definitely nowhere in the same league as Joel Schumacher's movie.
Yeah. So do we want to give this movie a rating out of 5?
Yeah.
Okay, Terry, so how many sudden filter changes out of 5 do you give Flatliners?
You know, I think I give it probably 3.5.
Okay.
I have problems with the script. I do think that it probably could have used a little bit of editing in terms of the narrative. But like we talked about, there is such a movement with the cinematography and the style that Joel Schumacher brings to it, that even when I'm kind of feeling that the story is kind of treading water, it still has this kind of forward momentum. And I don't think anyone really has the same style that Joel Schumacher did. And I love the kind of over the top camp sensibility he brought to his movies. It's just, I think it's a very interesting movie that I don't know if I'd keep going back to it in his filmography, but I think it's doing some interesting things at a time when we were moving out of the kind of like 80s horror trend. What about you, Mary Beth?
I agree. I would give it 3.5 sudden filter changes out of 5. I have a newfound appreciation for this movie. I think because I don't remember when I saw it. I think I just saw it and I kind of wrote it off as just like another like generic horror movie. But rewatching it, I do really, really realized how, you know, creative and strange and, you know, new that this movie was back then, especially like we said with coming out of the 80s with the slashers. I think I have a newfound appreciation for the film and for Joel Schumacher as a director, for sure. There are some issues I have with a couple of like the story plot, like the storylines, but you know, I think looking over that, it really is such like a cool piece of like early 90s film history that is a kind of a marker of things to come, like Michael said. Michael, you have the final word. How many sudden filter changes out of 5 do you give Flatliners?
You know, I think this will be an across the board. I would say 3.5 as well.
Okay.
I really do think that it was sort of a heralding call for a new decade of horror to have this movie come out in 1990. Mm-hmm. You know, we're coming off the heels of the boom of horror movies of the 80s. This movie is not just about the spooky things. You know, there's really no, like, none of the main characters are gone at the end of it, you know, but they all learn something. And it is a haunting tale that is more of like a lesson on death and dying, but also about consequence. And I think what's interesting is this is the kind of movie that if it came out today, this movie, not the remake, that I can really see press trying to say is an elevated horror film. You know, that phrase that they like to use.
Yeah.
Because there is a message. And I think that, you know, the message is you are the sum of your parts. It's like, I love that sequence. I forget who says it. It's like, you know what you did. And we all know what we did. And if this movie like makes you walk out of the theater not only thinking about those ghosts, but thinking about yourself, great, then that did what genre is supposed to do. That said, like, you know, there are things that I think in execution don't entirely work. And, you know, we are now looking at it 30 years on pretty much, where it's like things have changed, times have changed. But I, like I said, watching it again for the first time in a long time, there was still a bit of anxiety that seized at me that lasted over from childhood. And I know that's what your show's all about, is that scarring. So I have a place in my heart for it. And of course, Joel Schumacher's a master. One thing that I really just wanted to put out there, because I was thinking about it and we didn't talk about it, is I was taken this time with the fact that Billy Mahoney in his red hoodie is attacking Kiefer Sutherland. And I couldn't help but wonder if that was a visual homage to Donald Sutherland being attacked in Don't Look Now.
Yes. There was an image where he's in the Jeep and he looks out of the corner and he sees the kid with like the red jacket like running.
Yes.
That I immediately thought, I was like, oh my God, that is, and I didn't even put that he was Donald Sutherland together.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would assume it's intentional. If not, like, that's really great cosmic coincidence and it just proves the power of the flat line. But, yeah, no, I think that it's really, I was thinking about it last night and I was just like, I just need to say it on the air because maybe somebody listening will be like, actually, Joel Schumacher, blah, 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 blah. Like, you know, so if you're out there on the internet, know that like Joel Schumacher was a big Don't Look Now fan, please let me know. So.
Yes, please. Well, actually, yes. For once.
Please do.
Well, thank you so much, Michael, for joining us to talk about Flatliners. Where can listeners find you, and what do you have coming up that you would like to share or are able to share?
Well, so I will say that I was and am going to direct a feature film. We are still working on kind of the details of that due to the fact that COVID has slowed everything down. But I've put together a movie that I can only right now describe as a midnight drag prison exploitation kind of film.
Holy shit. Holy shit.
That the script has been done for a while. I already have people attached. I'm so excited to make it. It was going to shoot earlier this year, but of course we're on pause. And I'm sharing this now because people always ask when am I going to do a feature? Well, I hope it's worth the wait. That's all I'm going to say.
That sounds fucking amazing.
And, you know, if you liked Unusual Attachment, Unusual Attachment was made early enough into quarantine that we then, me, my production partner, and a lot of the people I work with have been sitting here, and it keeps going on. California continues to be closed. And so there was a point not long ago where we were like, well, shit, why don't we do another one? But we didn't want to retread territory that we already have done. And so Brandon Kirby and I co-created a project called So Far, So Close, and this is the first time I've talked about it publicly, which is an 8-part intersecting anthology series that is all about the ways our lives connect and on screen, and how we invest our time into screens and our lives and our loves and everything. And Brandon and I created the series. BJ Colangelo, who I know you both know, has joined us to write an episode or two.
Oh my God!
And we also have we already have most of the cast locked. It's a very diverse ensemble of actors from all over the world.
Oh, cool.
And it's, like I said, it's going to be 8 parts. Some stories are funny. Some stories are sad. Some stories are scary. And they're all queer-based, and they all intersect in some way. So it may seem initially that they're 8 individual stories, but as the season goes on, you'll see how all these people know each other, and we're very excited about it because, again, it was a project that didn't exist until now, and I was like, well, why don't we take what we did with Unusual Attachment and look at it in a different way? And it's sort of like, what are all the ways we invest in the internet and in our screens, and it's a lot. Like, you know, there is video chat, there's web therapy, there's Grindr, there's, you know, work platforms and Zoom, and we're exploring a little bit of it all to bring all these people together. So that's coming soon.
That sounds fucking rad.
That's so cool.
And then as for me, you can find me most easily on Twitter at Michael Varrati. It's V as in Victor, Arrati. I use the same name everywhere. Also, Instagram is a good place. You can add me on Facebook, but I look at Facebook once every, many, and people get mad because like months will pass before I look at the friend request and they think I'm ignoring them. I'm not. I'm ignoring Facebook in general.
A good practice, I feel like, though.
Yes. And then Dead for Filth, if you're interested in hearing me wax on about queer horror whenever we pop in and out of existence, it's at Dead for Filth, and it's available wherever podcasts are found.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
So listeners, you've heard from us, but we want to hear from you. What was your experience with Flatliners? Send us an email at scarredforlifepodcast@gmail.com or reach out to us directly on Twitter. I'm at MB McAndrews.
And I'm a Gaily Dreadful.
And of course, keep the conversation going by following the podcast on Twitter at Scarred Podcast.
And please don't forget to review, rate, and subscribe.
Thank you to Steve Barnold for our artwork. Thank you to Sean Keller for our amazing music. Thank you to everyone for listening. Please stay safe out there, but most importantly, stay creepy.
And until next time.
As a person with a very deep voice, I'm hired all the time for advertising campaigns. But a deep voice doesn't sell B2B, and advertising on the wrong platform doesn't sell B2B either. That's why if you're a B2B marketer, you should use LinkedIn ads. LinkedIn has the targeting capabilities to help you reach the world's largest professional audience. That's right, over 70 million decision makers all in one place. All the big wigs, then medium wigs, also small wigs who are on the path to becoming big wigs. Okay, that's enough about wigs. LinkedIn ads allows you to focus on getting your B2B message to the right people. So, does that mean you should use ads on LinkedIn instead of hiring me, the man with the deepest voice in the world? Yes. Yes, it does. Get started today and see why LinkedIn is the place to be to be. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
What is The Briefing Room? It's a behind-the-scenes look at how the criminal justice system works and the lives of the people within that system. If you love true crime, well, these are the real people who do the job every day of making sure justice is served. Hi, I'm Detective Dave. I'm Detective Dan. Together, we have decades of experience in local law enforcement, a profession that we think is often misunderstood. So we're going to explore how to do it right, and we won't shy away from when it's done wrong. These are stories you'll hear nowhere else. Unique, frank, and unvarnished. From the team that brought you Small Town Dicks, this is The Briefing Room. Episode 1 drops on August 30th. We'll meet you in the briefing room.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.